good evening and welcome. No, it's not Sidney Roundwood. We are Sydneyless at the start of this episode, but welcome all the same. We have before us a bit of a road trip, a bit of an impromptu road trip, as Nick and I are in Lardmobile 4 streaking down the M20 towards Eurotunnel and the greater European hinterland that lies beyond. Nick,
yes.
tell us a bit about what we're up to. It's a bit impromptu, this, isn't it? We were planning to do Arnhem, weren't we? But Sidney couldn't make it.
Yeah, this is something that's been on our sort of bucket list of battlefield trips for a long time, but it's been a really tough thing to try and pull together. I still don't really know how we're going to make this work, actually, but it's oh my god o'clock at the moment. It's so dark outside that I don't quite know whether we're on the road or driving along the railway tracks or where we're at. My eyes are still half closed. I've had 3.5 hours sleep. God knows what I've got in my suitcase. But I've got some fruit pastels and some jelly babies and some of those nice black and red wine gums.
Oh, lovely.
Which always go down a treat for this kind of thing.
Well,
and we're in the car and we're headed, as you say, to the land of the free on the other side of the tunnel.
Right. Well, essentially, the plan was originally to do a tour which would take us from Joe's Bridge all the way up to Arnhem. I couldn't commit to it because I was so heavily involved in the build project for Crisis. Sidney, unfortunately, had to pull out because his wife has got him locked in the spare bedroom. And it was looking like the whole thing wasn't going to happen. Then all of a sudden, I realised I'd finished the Crisis build project and was going to be twiddling my thumbs for a couple of days before we left. So I said to Nick, why don't we just get in the car, head for Joe's Bridge, which for those of you who've seen the film A Bridge Too Far, is the jump-off point from which the Irish Guards battle group commenced Operation Market, heading north up Club Route, and we'll see how far we get. We've really not done as much planning as we would ordinarily do. We have got a vague idea of obviously where we want to go, but we're not quite sure how far we're gonna get. So I guess, like 30 Corps, it's going to be a question of, do we make Arnhem in time?
That's right, yeah. Very famously, of course, it was the plan was to make Eindhoven in 2 to 3 hours and Arnhem in 2 to 3 days.
Yeah.
Isn't that what Horrocks says in his famous speech, immortalised by Edward Fox in the film?
That's right. And as Dirk Bogarde said, it's all a question of bridges.
It's all a question of bridges.
So we're just hoping that Mr. Juncker hasn't blown any up.
Well, we've just been over the first bridge. We've made it across the Dartford Bridge, which was secured for us by Thurrock Town Council. So we were okay with that one. We're now going to try and advance across a carpet of hotels that we've booked at the last minute. God knows what they're going to look like.
No.
And whether we get to the end of this journey or not, who knows?
No.
But we are on Howells Highway, headed for the ultimate goal, a bridge over the Rhine.
Right.
So it's going to be a cracking trip. I don't think we're going to see the battlefields in the same detail as we normally do.
No.
Very often we're able to go to sectional platoon level.
Yeah.
Whereas this time, because of the research involved and because of the size of the battlefields we're going to be looking at, we're not going to be able to go necessarily to that detail all the time.
No.
So it would be lovely to follow an individual unit through the story of Market Garden. The nature of it is that we're not going to be able to do it quite in that way, but I think we'll still get some really insightful views that will help us in the future.
Well, certainly we've got a car full of books.
and pork pies, by the way.
And pork pies.
I didn't tell you that bit.
Well, funny thing is, I don't like pork pies, so they're all yours.
Terrible shame. Terrible shame. Let me just get one. Where are they?
Yeah, so we've got a whole selection of books. So It's pitch black at the moment, so we're just waiting for the sun to come up, at which point, as I drive, Nick will be planning and we'll be discussing what exactly we want to see. So our hope is that by the time we reach Joe's Bridge, we've got a bit of a plan which will take us to Valkenswaard. We booked into, I think, what they call it, a bijou hotel in Valkenswaard, which looks very swinging from the pictures.
Crossroads Motel.
And when we get there, we want to plan for day 2 and just see how far we get. I mean, one of the options is just maybe do Valkenswaard, then head across to Overloon and look at some of the Peel-Ram line for the 1940 campaign. The other option is see how we get on and just keep going north as 30 Corps did. So we'll play it by ear and we'll let you know how we get on.
Yeah.
For now, it's I was only 59 minutes from Folkestone, so we'll speak to you later. Oh my gosh, we're back again, and this time we're on the other side of the Manche, or English Channel as it's probably known.
I can tell that because you're driving on the other side of the road.
I am indeed, because we've just crossed the border into the beautiful country of Belgium. All that kit I bought for the purpose of driving on the roads of France is now completely irrelevant, so I can stow that away in the boot with 15 breathalyzers and a Dayglow yellow jacket and a colostomy bag or whatever else you need in your French driving kit is now no longer applicable. But so here we are, we're in Belgium, the country best known for Crisis, Europe's premier wargame show. I think they're also known for Belgian buns, but I think Crisis is definitely the preferable of the two. I'd rather have Crisis than a Belgian bun.
Well, you can't have Crisis every week of the year, whereas you can have Belgian buns whenever you wish.
You can indeed. And
if you can't get to Crisis, have a Belgian bun.
Have a Belgian bun. That would be a great tribute act type thing to do. So we're over here. We've zoomed across the water, or more at the point underneath it as we went through the tunnel, and we're just thinking about heading for the workshop, but of course we can't head for the workshop, so what we've done is we've brought the workshop with us, metaphorically speaking. Nick,
yeah.
Tell me,
yes,
what have you been doing in your workshop recently in the run-up to our trip to Crisis?
Well, let me talk about that which is most fresh and uppermost in my mind, which is how I spent yesterday evening.
Right.
So,
lingerie?
Yeah, no, not
silk,
quite that.
satin, leather and lace?
It was spent online,
right.
Indulging some passions.
Right.
But it wasn't doing what you might think I was doing. As you know, we've done some commercial strategy gaming of late, and one of the aspects that comes out of that is that commercial strategy gamers love the idea of using war games and decision making exercises to formulate strategy and help them test their thinking, but they don't like some of the mechanisms that we use, thinking that they're a little bit paper based and outdated, and to make them feel like we're in touch with the modern world
that I've heard about.
Yes, there's lots of interest about how you might use some of these team communication channels that are now available to organisations and businesses,
right.
And are commonly used in lots of modern organisations.
Right.
And I'm talking here about applications such as Slack and Discord, and there are others, and I'm sure that there are many people listening who will use different versions of it. Lots of interest about how you can use those as part of that decision-making exercise. So it's really using an internet chat room approach,
right.
to developing a game narrative.
That sounds like total jibber jabber to me.
Yeah, well, it is.
Mate.
Well, and it was a little bit jibber jabber to me. So, what I thought was that I'd have a dive into this. I put some requests out on Twitter to say to people, look, does anybody use these team communication chats?
Yeah.
I've had a little bit of exposure to some of them.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of replies, and one of them, crucially, an important one that flashed in my head very early was a suggestion from Mike Hobbs.
Ah, the Welsh wizard.
The Welsh wizard waved his wand and said to me, take ye unto the Discord channel and and have a go at using that, because that's the kind of thing that might work.
Okay.
So I logged on. Mike set up a chat that I could get onto and have a look at and poke around with.
Right.
And literally within half an hour, with a little bit of guidance from Mike, I'd set up a team channel that I could then use to invite people to join.
Right.
And I started to put together some ideas for a game.
Sounds like the online equivalent of swinging.
Well, a little bit like that, in as much as you can invite anybody you wish from the internet and hang out with them.
Exactly.
And exchange information and messages with them. Yes, an internet-based tool.
Yeah.
Obviously, you invite who you wish to it, so the boundaries are up to you to set, really.
Right.
But the idea was that we'd have a go at using this as a tool to play a Kriegspiel.
Right.
So whereas you might normally play, for instance, a play-by-email game,
right,
PBEM, acronym, I believe
that's
it's known
the terminology, mate.
Yeah, that's the terminology. Where you will send people maps and ask them to make their orders and send their instructions to you.
Yeah.
And then a few days later, you'll update the timeline and tell them what's happened, etc.
Yeah.
This offers the ability to do that, but to do it at speed in a live online interactive way. So if you manage the timeline well enough as an umpire, you can play the kind of game that will take you 2 to 3 weeks to do as a play by email, and you can do it in 2 to 3 hours. So the idea was that we'd have a go at that. So I enlisted, I didn't enlist at all. People volunteered to help out with this. In fact, we had 6 players in the end.
That's right. I remember. I wasn't invited to take part, was I?
No. We selection was on the opposable thumbs clause, and you didn't qualify.
No.
So you had to have opposable thumbs to be able to play, and that was the criteria.
Okay.
However, the great and the good assembled, and from across the internet.
Right.
So we had a game, and it did involve an international aspect. We have gamer from Benito from Spain. Was on there.
España. Viva España.
Madrid was there with us.
Yeah, brilliant.
As well as guys from the UK.
Yeah.
And in fact, when it came down to it, to run the actual game in the evening, and this is a really interesting part of this, when it came down to running the game, one of the guys who was there taking part in the game was in the military, out on an exercise,
right,
and playing in the game from his remote location.
Good to see he's focusing on the defence of the realm.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I'm sure it was official downtime that he was able to put into it. But the aspect of it was that it means that you can game this from anywhere. You can access these apps through your mobile telephone or through your laptop. So you can play this game as long as you can access the chat channel. You can play it from the train or the bus.
Okay, so explain this to me then. So presumably, if we're using easy and quick metaphors, which being thick I can understand, this isn't like collecting the 6 players together in your village hall where everybody can hear what's going on. Presumably, I don't know, does each team have their own room as you would do in a traditional Kriegspiel, or how does it work?
That is how it works. So you create those rooms virtually by creating a channel that you can then put those people in. You can assign them the rights to be able to discuss.
So I could be at home, enjoying a lovely cup of cocoa and a Belgian bun, maybe.
Indeed.
And I could be talking to my comrade in arms, who's on an Eisteddford in Bedford.
Indeed. So, and the way we trialled this out, because this was a proof of principle really, was we put the game together. At the very head of it all, we had an open channel, so everybody can communicate with everybody.
And what did you use that for?
And that's generally to set the terms, say this is the way we're going to run the game.
This is effectively the village hall. You would call all 6 players in there and go, this is how the game works, here's the big overall map,
Yeah.
Now here's your briefings. Individually, go away and go to your own rooms and make your plans.
Yeah,
Is that
so
right?
we had an open channel, and
Yeah.
then at the same level as the open channel,
Yeah.
we had a map room. And in the map room, funnily enough, were the maps. And they could be accessed by anybody and downloaded.
Okay.
If they wanted to, they could print them out, or they could just look at them on their telephone.
Yeah.
And then...
Or presumably laptop, computer,
whatever,
desktop.
iPad. I think guys were playing on iPads.
Right. Okay. Wow.
So it's down to you really, whatever you want to look at it at. It's the flexibility of it. So you have those top levels, and then what you do is
So I could actually play that game on my iPad while pretending that I'm listening to what my wife is saying.
You could.
That actually has an appeal to it, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, and indeed. So that's
if I just said yes to her every 10 minutes, that would appear that I'm actually talking to her.
And once you've got the guys in that top level area, you can then say, okay, you're going to be the red team as we did it, and you're going to be the blue team.
Okay, traditional
Kriegspiel, and then you can send them away into their individual chat channels and give them their team briefings
so that
for them to discuss in that room.
That chat channel just allows them, let's say, presumably 2 teams of 3, that allows the red team to talk to each other in their space, and that allows the blue team to talk to each other in their space, and that's private and can't be seen by anybody else other than the umpire.
And the umpire, of course, can go between any room as he needs to and input and answer questions.
So this is precisely an electronic version of a traditional Kriegspiel setup. It's just that you don't have to gather together to do it. Okay, I understand what you're saying.
And then the beauty of it is, again, below that, is that as those red and blue teams fragment into different locations, so if you're commanding one...
So if I'm at Wavre and you're at Linney, for example... Then
I can create sub-rooms and put you
chuck
in that
me
room.
out a blue room and you give me blue room 2 or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. But potentially I'll still allow you to chat to your other players in the blue room.
Wow.
Depending on what communication you've got with them.
In the words of Busted, I've been to the year 3000.
Yeah, so we played a World War II game.
Right.
So the guys split their commands into individual columns.
Yeah.
So I, as the umpire, was giving injects to the individual columns, and yet allowing them to discuss amongst themselves.
When you say injects, is that legal?
Yeah. What I mean by that is a piece of information provided by the umpire.
Right, okay.
As to where their game was going.
Okay.
And they could then discuss that with each other in their team channel.
Yeah.
So they could, for instance, what that represents is them getting on the wireless network and saying, I've encountered enemy troops at Wavre. And they could chat amongst themselves what they wanted to do about that. But without them being involved in the nitty-gritty of what was going on in each location.
Okay, brilliant.
Anyway, to cut what is a long story short, for the purposes of the podcast, we tried it out as a proof of principle, and it absolutely worked.
Right.
I was working as the umpire. I had next to me a printout of the map, and I was using little counters on the map to move the timeline forward, exactly the same way as you were with the Kriegspiel, and sharing that information with the players as the game progressed.
Okay.
And for that purpose, I think it was a job well done, in as much as it really did what we wanted it to do, and gives us, well, certainly whets my appetite to do more of it.
Portable pocket Kriegspiel then, really. It allows you to get together for a game wherever you are in the world, and for rather than, you know, as a Kriegspiel, which you could play with mates in a village hall, you can do that with anybody around the world. But also, it's a very quick way of dealing with a play-by-email campaign, which can take weeks, if not months.
The way that I set it up was on Friday, for instance. We selected the players. The players came forward on Friday, and even on Saturday.
That's
actually.
Those lucky enough to be allowed to play, not me.
Those early responders who were carefully tuned to my plea. Who responded and said, "Yes, I'd like to play." We set up the channel on Friday, allocated to their teams on Friday, gave them the brief on Friday, and the only thing we said was, have a look at the maps, have a look at your briefings, give me your initial orders. Ready for us to play the game on Monday evening, and then be online at 19:30 hours. Be online at 19:30 hours. If we're all online, we can all play, and that's exactly what we did, and that's exactly how it worked.
Okay. Sounds exciting.
It was exciting, so I want to do more.
Tell me, how are you going to apply that in future? Is it one of those exercises that you go, yeah, that was interesting, or is it something you can see people picking up and running with? Do you think maybe you should be writing an article in the annual telling people how you ran it and how it worked?
Thanks for that.
Well, just a thought, really.
You know, I think you're
some of us have them.
Yeah, I think some of us are paid not to think. I think you're right. I think it is an area of potential for gaming that actually we should be exploring.
Yeah.
There's lots of interesting ideas on it, and the guys who played the game have been sharing their thoughts on what we might do with it.
Yeah.
And to be fair, it's very raw. It's within the last 24 hours. So still digesting how it works and what we might do with it. And maybe there's more channels or different channels that we could use in a different way.
It's interesting. I've long wished to refight the spring offensive of 1918, the Kaiserschlacht battles, as a Kriegspiel. But the number of people that it would involve getting together in one hall was about 60. I mean, if you were going to do the whole thing, it was going to be colossal, where each corps had its own commander and its own chief of staff to manage the logistics, because the battles of the Great War are very logistics intense. But that is the type of thing that getting 60 people together in one venue with enough space to run the maps and run the people and run the catering is non-viable, really, whereas it is something you could do with gamers from all over the world and use that medium by the sounds of it.
And we know, don't we, that Kriegspiel is quite umpire heavy.
Yeah.
To be done properly, it needs to have good quality umpire input, and at the moment what's not tested is the ability to what number of players can one umpire look after. So I did six last night. It was fairly manic, I can tell you.
Right.
And I've done it before, lots of it before. So I don't know how big it can grow or how you need to grow that umpire network. But I would say it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility that you could do a big game. And you wouldn't have to do it in one night. You could just say, well, each week we're going to do it for 2 hours, and then come back the next week and do another 2 hours. That would be entirely up to you, because the chat room will be there as long as you keep it open.
You hear a bang, it starts going through the speed barrier.
Yeah, I noticed that. The sound barrier.
Yeah, whatever it's called. Right. Okay, so that is interesting. That's good. Have you been actually doing anything practical and sensible, like painting any figures?
I have been doing some painting. I've been buying lots of small items.
Right.
Things like scatter and that for various games, and just bits and pieces I pick up online.
Scatter, that's interesting actually, because I've been looking at a lot of scatter as well.
Yes. Well, you've been a busy boy as well, haven't you?
I have.
You going to tell us about that?
Yeah, I can do, and then I'll kind of draw the two conversations together. It might be best if I start from the very beginning, as Mary Poppins once told me.
It's a very good place to start.
It's a very good place to start. I've been building the terrain for Crisis. We do the rounds with shows and Lardy Games days throughout the year, and I know it's very easy to put together one really swish game and take that to everywhere for the season, but I'd like to have a bit of variety. I like to do something different, which means I tend never to build anything that's incredibly good, but I do tend to build 2 or 3 different games that we can run out, so we have a bit of variety. So if people have played one of our let's say Chain of Command at Evesham, they'll be playing a different game at Selwig or a different game at Crisis, and I like to do something new and different for Crisis because it's my favourite show of the year, and I think that it's nice to make an effort for people and let them appreciate the fact that you're trying to cater and create something a bit different. So as we are heading for Belgium, I decided to do a game set in Holland.
Well, close enough.
Well, absolutely. Obviously, we've recently published the 1940 handbook, and I wanted to do something which was pertinent to that. Unfortunately, I really can't find any Belgian figures that I really like. I know some people tell me that the Belgian army were not necessarily wearing their great coats during the 1940 campaign. Well, maybe so, but then every photograph I see of them, they are wearing great coats and the Adrian helmet. And I really want Crusader to convert their French figures, which would, involve some changes, but not too much hard work. Get the new kit on and have some really nice Belgian figures. However, that may be a project for me to do myself, do a bit of conversion work. But May 40 Miniatures in the Netherlands produced some very nice Dutch figures. So I decided I would do a game set in Holland, and I found it really interesting while researching the 1940 campaign, how intense the fighting in the Netherlands was, and how interested I became in their defensive lines. So I wanted to do a water-based defensive position, so a canal line or river line, backed up with pillboxes, casemates they call them, and I decided to have that with a classic waterfront with a quay and some merchants' houses with those beautiful gable ends that we see in places like Amsterdam. So it's involved a lot of messing about with MDF kits and converting things and chopping and changing bits of terrain. So that's kept me really busy. Painting all the figures, obviously, but the game is going to be a single reinforced Dutch platoon facing a German infantry platoon and a German assault pioneer platoon who've got some rather nice assault boats, which they took a fair amount of time to do the conversion work on them. I used the Warlord Games bolt action figures, the plastics, which are great for chopping and changing. So that allowed me to produce some really nice platoons worth of assault boats.
And what about the rubber boats? Where'd you get those from?
I bought them from a company who are online called Any Scale Miniatures. They sell a lot on eBay, and I looked up rubber assault boats and there they were. So went with them, produced in resin, and I can't see where I'm going because of the spray. Right, okay, yeah, and very nice stuff. In fact, and this is where it all ties in, if you look at Any Scale Miniatures, you'll find they do quite a bit of scatter, and I found myself looking about for bits and pieces which could bring the table to life. So I put together and painted a little garden scene using the greenhouse from Supreme Littleness Designs up in Scotland as a centrepiece. And just looking at things like, the village water pump, a well. I built the yards for the merchants' houses, so looking for barrels and boxes of produce to litter them with. So it really looks like somewhere that's lived in rather than somewhere that's just been, individual houses plonked on the table. And
those items are not just for scatter, not just to make the table look good, but they're the degree of realism to the level of cover that's available as well.
Yeah, they do. That's a really important point. Now, take for example, if the Dutch are defending that yard and they decide to move those barrels over to create a barricade, well, why not? That's what you might do in reality. Well, or you might sit in the yard and drink the beer that's in them, which is probably a more enjoyable option.
I seem to remember in other games as well where we've used them. I have memories of in a late war game, I have memories of an American NCO and a couple of guys being pinned down behind the outside toilet.
Oh yeah.
And there's a certain realism that comes from that. A lot of the narratives, will tie into those kind of small things that are so important in games. So they look lovely and they give a real practical aspect to the game. They're fun to do.
It's allowing you to suspend your disbelief.
Yeah.
A table designed for toy soldiers is a table full of toys, really, isn't it? The buildings are toys, the figures are toys, but you get games like Al Sherwood's Stalingrad game, which I know he's due to run at Warfare in Reading,
middle of November.
Those games allow you to really immerse yourself in it, because the feeling of being there, the plausibility, the beauty of the game is there, and that really helps you enjoy what's going on. You suspend that disbelief, and in a way, if you're like a child at Christmas playing with your train set, you are Casey Jones, as steaming and a rolling, for those of us who never can forget that song.
And there's loads of places you can find this scatter. Model railway places are always good to look as well.
They are good.
Look
and
outside your period.
Often a lot cheaper. Often you can go to model railway places and get things like clump foliage or lichen, lichen, call it what you will, a lot cheaper than you do in a War Games shop. And places like 4D Models in London. I use them a lot for supplying things like cabbages and pumpkins and fir trees and little ornamental trees, the type of thing that really do bring the table to life, which are built for architectural models, but they're quite unique, because we tend to, as wargamers, we tend to buy our terrain from wargame suppliers. This is stuff from another source that maybe nobody's got, and people go to a show and they go, wow, look at that, that's I've not seen that before, and that it's that uniqueness that gives the tables their appeal so often.
So we're going to do, or you're going to be running a Crisis, the chain of command. So Dutch versus Germans.
Dutch versus Germans.
Do you want to say a bit about the Dutch organisation at the platoon level? Because it's going to be quite a different game for some gamers who've never come across that particular structure before. Well, what makes the Dutch different to anybody else?
They live in windmills, but that won't actually affect the game. Most of them, if not, it's tulips. The Dutch are unusual in that, having avoided very wisely the First World War, they tend not to automatically break their squads down into teams. They can, of course, in chain of command, detach men from the section to go and scout, or to operate as a separate machine gun team should they so wish. But they tend to operate as entire sections. The Dutch, because of the nature of their reservist army, don't have the two senior leaders, so they've only got one senior leader to control the whole platoon, so they really are focused and reliant on their junior leaders to do their job. And they also have an unusual feature, which is the fact that the casemate bunkers they have were designed to take 2 men on the LMG, which is the old First World War Lewis gun, and the section leader. So those 3 guys run off and man one of the bunkers. The rest of the guys from the section are standing around a little bit like spare parts. So there are some real command and control challenges with the Dutch. But on the positive side, they are defending terrain which is great for defence, because it's a low-lying country and therefore you've got a lot of waterways and the ability to flood land, inundate ground. So they're a tough nut to crack because of the defences that they've got. And whilst their men weren't brilliantly trained, they put up a hell of a fight, and it's hopefully that's going to be replicated in the game that we see, which is why we've allowed them two platoons against 1 for the Germans, because they're going to need their numbers to try and get across that waterway.
Great, it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds at the show.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And you're going to be running Water Tanker, aren't you?
We'll be running Water Tanker, in the Lard Zone. We've got a really good set-up plan for this year, so opportunity to come along, try your hand at Water Tanker. So Water Tanker wasn't around when we came to Crisis last time.
No.
So, funny enough, we didn't bring it with us.
No.
But this year we have. We'll be playing it all day, and you can come along and have a go at it. We'll be doing the Barkman Corner Overdrive game, which is the same one we ran at Salwick, but we know that it's fun. We know that it's inclusive.
Brilliant fun,
and we know that it gives a nice, simple, fast game. So, hopefully some people who listen to this will have come along and will have played it, because this will be going out, of course, when we're back in the UK and have access to the full recording studio to do the mix.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, there we go. So we've been busy bunnies, as you can hear, and we're going to be kept even busier now over the coming weekend. So what we're going to do now is we're going to carry on through the driving rain as we make our way across Belgium, on our way towards Joe's Bridge for the start of our magical mystery tour, which we're not sure where we'll end up, but we'll keep you informed as the show progresses. Well, here we are, Nick. We are at Joe's Bridge. The site of Joe's Bridge. Looking up to our right, we see the modern structure. Right in front of us, in a dip, really, in the ground, we have the site of Joe's Bridge, as was captured by an Irish Guards battle group on the 10th of September 1944. The original bridge, which had stood on the concrete pillars to our right, had been destroyed by the Dutch in May of 1940, and German pioneers had replaced that with a lower level bridge in wood down where we're standing now, and that was captured by coup de main by the Irish Guards on the 10th of September. Very much part of the confusion going on after the withdrawal from Normandy. British tanks were able to rush across the bridge, supported by infantry, with the German defenders thinking they were friendly tanks retiring northwards. And that capture laid the way open for the whole of Operation Market Garden. Having that bridge in British hands allowed the whole operation to unfold from there. So tell us about this spot, Nick.
Yes, well, of course, we know it as Joe's Bridge, and of course there is some story about how that bridge actually got its name. So there are two theories here. We tend to assume, I think, that because it's played by Michael Caine in the film A Bridge Too Far, that actually the bridge was named after J.O.E. Vandeleur, Lieutenant Colonel Vandeleur, who's in charge of the Irish Guards battle group. But actually there is a counter theory that it was named after the Royal Engineer Troop, who were called Joe's Troop, who are the guys who actually did the work on the bridge. So anyway, this is Joe's Bridge, and of course it's used as the bridgehead for the attack that will take them through to Arnhem. And of course, after they capture it, there's a very interesting little episode where the household cavalry armoured cars are tasked with shooting up the road as fast as they can to Valkenswaard to ascertain whether or not the bridges south of Valkenswaard on the little tributary there, little river there called the Dommel, I think, big question mark over whether or not that will take the way to tanks. So these two little armoured cars shoot up the road through all the German positions, mad dash to find out whether or not they can get across the bridge. And there's a rather tragic little episode when they encounter a bunch of Dutch civilians and speak to them near the other end, near Valkenswaard. And in fact, what the Germans carry out some reprisals, and some of those Dutch civilians are killed as subsequent to that event. But the armoured cars dash back down the road and get back into Joe's Bridge. So they know that they can use this as a jump-off point for the attack on the 17th, because they know that that bridge further up the road is now strong enough to take tanks, and the whole thing becomes feasible.
That's great, excellent. Now we're just going to get back in the car. We're going to head north, just past the Dutch border, to a point where the British are making first contact with the German defenders. So let's get in and go. here we are. I'm stood here with Nick. Nick, we've just crossed over the Belgian-Dutch border. We're 2 miles north of Joe's Bridge here?
Yeah, if that, yeah.
And we're on a road that's dead straight as an arrow. Tell me what was the situation here back in September 1944?
So this has been the bridgehead that the Allies had over the canal line, and the orders, of course, for the land-based aspect of Market Garden is to punch straight up this road to reach Eindhoven and the airborne forces that are there. So you've got Guards Armour Brigade making the breakout, and actually everything going quite well for the first 10 minutes, and then they get into this killing ground where they lose 9 tanks in the space of a couple of miles. And you can see, that this is a dead straight piece of road. Okay, we're not looking at it the way it was in 1944, but there's woods to our right here, and you can see this is a great place to be sitting with an infantry anti-tank team. And we're right in also the artillery, don't forget, would have been pounding through this area.
Yeah. And we're actually at the point where the artillery bombardment started.
Yes,
and then continued all the way up that road, almost all the way to Valkenswaard, which is incredible. This is the section where on the film, Michael Caine was commanding the Irish Guards Battle Group.
That's right, in the film, yeah.
And where he said, "You're only meant to blow the bloody doors off."
Yeah, that's exactly what he said.
Right.
And then he said, this road, about this bit we're on now, he says this is the wide part.
Right, okay.
Because there was concerns about tanks being able to go off the road and into the polder, because the polder was wet and the fears that they were bogged in.
Yeah.
And also, also fears about mines as well. But there are photos that show the tanks going off road into the fields. So you've got tanks pushing through here, hitting enemy positions, and then of course they turn to their trump card, which is the Royal Air Force. And what they're calling in there is something like 250 sorties are flown over the next couple of hours to destroy the German positions, the 3 camp groups that are trying to hold this breakthrough, hold the British in their positions.
Yeah, because a lot of people talk about the Irish Guards Battle Group zooming up the road, but you've also got other battalions to the left and right of the road, clearing the polder area and clearing the woodlands to either side. I think the Devons...
You've got
from memory.
Yeah, I think that could be right, and they're supported with Cromwell tanks as well on the sides.
Yeah.
So their job is, and in fact they lose quite heavy casualties, I think, on the left of the main force there as they're clearing out the villages to the left.
Yeah.
And of course the main punch has got to be down the main road. So it's a bit of a hellish place, I would have said.
Well, it's pretty hellish now. It's just started snowing.
Almost.
So we're going to have a little bit of wander around and see what else we can see. And hopefully the doors will still be intact on my car when we come back.
See if we can make it to Valkenswaard before it gets dark.
Let's try that. Well, here we are. In the town square in Valkenswaard, the shadows are starting to lengthen on what is a rather damp evening. We've got rain coming down, but it looks like a lovely little town. Nick, we've got a big square in front of us with the usual central church. But what was happening here on September the 17th, 1944, the first day of Operation Market Garden?
Well, it's not until about 7:30 that they actually get into town in the evening and start to leaguer up around the square here. So they pushed out from the bridgehead, 2:30. They get hit early on, and at 5:30 they reach the little Dommel Bridge, the one that we said that the household cavalry had wrecked. Well, they get to that, and at that point they have a reorganisation. 1st and 3rd squadrons that had been leading, they're replaced by 2nd and 4th squadron. That takes some time to do that, get across that little bridge, and then they start to arrive into town. So they start to pull in. The vehicles are here. Of course, they've lost 60 men killed in that action, roughly. Most of those from 1st and 3rd squadrons who've taken a bad hit. And so the square starts to fill up, and it gets dark, and they decide that they're not going to push on through the night. A few weeks earlier, when they were driving for the Somme, the Guards had actually pushed on overnight. But at Valkenswaard, news was in that the Somme bridge was down, so the decision was made to stay here overnight. This square and all the roads around it fill up with vehicles, and the guards are in until the following morning.
Like the British, we're going to be staying here tonight after the first night of our very own Operation Market Garden, and we are going to be planning to try and get things right for day 2. So I think it's time for a few beers, get the books out, get the maps out, and see what we can line up for tomorrow. Just coming up, you can see it ahead, the Son Bridge is there. It looks nothing like the one in the film. Whoops, there we go, we're about to go across it, and there we are, we're over.
We're over. Outside.
What's the river? What's the river called? Or is it
a
wet one? It's called the wet one.
So we need to park up here. If we park up here just by the supermarket.
I'm parking up here now. Right.
Okay, great stuff.
Good result.
Let's go.
We're back, and we have decided after our first day heading up the first part of 30 Corps route to Valkenswaard to continue on up and see how far we get. All a bit of a leap into the unknown, but Nick, you did some planning last night, frantic looking through books, and we kicked off today. Moving on up Club Route or Hell's Highway, depending on how you want to have it. What have we done so far? It's now 12:01. We're just after midday. What have we covered thus far?
Had a very nice hot chocolate.
It was good breakfast, actually, I have to say.
Excellent continental breakfast.
Lovely bread.
Yeah, lovely.
Really nice bread.
Ham, cheese.
Yes, salami. I like a bit of salami in the morning.
Really good. A few beers, bottles of wine from yesterday evening. So it was a nice,
very pleasant evening.
But you want me to talk about the touring part? I would guess.
I think the touring part's probably more interesting than our alcohol consumption.
You know, I have done some prep because I was keen that we would get out here. So I've done some of the reading beforehand, but some of it is very much on the hoof because we don't know exactly where we're going to be going or what exactly we're going to be looking at. Yeah. I've got some routes lined up, and I've starred them, and I've actually used Google Maps for that process. It's been quite interesting over the last week or so. What I've done is gone through Google Maps, identified the areas I want to go to, save them in Google Maps, and then you've got them there so you can press the button on your phone and it will navigate you to that point. So we're using that today. Yeah. And the first one we're using it for is to get us to Son Bridge. So we're going to be sticking the club route as best we can, and we followed it this morning as best we could. Yeah. Around Eindhoven isn't very easy because it's a big industrial area now, big town. So we did come off it to get to Son Bridge, but we made it to Son Bridge and we saw a couple of interesting things there. Obviously the site of the bridge where the Germans blew the bridge famously in the faces of the American paratroopers. Yeah.
Rude.
How rude. That was interesting. But more interesting than that, though, was we were reading about the attack of 107 Panzer along that canal line, attempting to retake the Son Bridge.
That was really good, and I think we pretty much found exactly the position where the lead Panther was knocked out. Yeah. It's all about urban sprawl, isn't it, really? Son, which was a little village at the time, is now, it was a little town at the time, is now almost being a suburb of Eindhoven, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And you've got the situation there, though, in 1944, where they've re-established the Bailey, famously built the Bailey Bridge there. Yeah. And the Germans counter-attack, I think it's on the 19th, it might be the Alcott. And they counter-attack there with 5 Panther tanks with infantry on the southern side of the canal. Yeah. And first the Americans know about this is that they get a sort of, bit of a heads up from some of the Dutch civilians, and then
on their bicycles, zooming along the towpath, apparently. Yeah.
And then these tanks appear off the towpath, come round the corner. Panther tank on the towpath fires at the bridge, blows up a British ammunition truck that's passing from along club route.
Yeah.
Of course, momentarily closing the bridge while they do that.
Sure.
And the Americans have to counter it, and it's a really interesting action there. 5 Panther tanks with a platoon of infantry up against an American airborne platoon in the defensive, who rush a 57mm anti-tank gun to the scene to fire across the canal.
Yeah.
And they actually knock out the lead Panther
Sure.
with a shot which is virtually a flank shot from across the canal as the Panther advances on the bridge. So fascinating game. Would make a great chain of command game, actually.
We were discussing that. I mean, the idea of a big chain of command game with a platoon of tanks and a platoon of Panzer Grenadiers coming up against an airborne platoon sent out as a patrol with a base of fire over in the school, their headquarters, maybe a 50 cal, a 30 cal, and then a 6-pounder on the far bank. Would make a fabulous game. Really interesting to refight that action.
And the Americans have lots of ranking leaders there as well, because they've got a headquarters there. So they've got lieutenant colonels taking out
heading out with patrols. Yeah.
So interesting from that perspective in terms of the way the leadership pans out. Anyway, so we've looked at Somme Bridge. We've been therefore taking club route beyond Somme up towards Vegel or Vessel, as I believe the Dutch call it.
Yeah.
And we've actually stopped on that route as well. Spent some time exploring area around Kervering, which is where the Germans pushed south from Schindler and crossed the line on the 24th and 25th of September. So right at the end of towards the end of the campaign, as far as British Airborne are concerned, where they're still holding out. The Germans break through club route. They push on Erde. And by doing so, they create a gap where they can cross Hals Highway, and they cross it and break it for 2 whole days. They push. They've got some armour down there. They've got 3 Jagdpanzer in there.
Jagdpanthers,
And they've even got some old sort of 1940, what look like Jagdpanzer Panther 1s from some of the photographs.
No, they're not, because they're on the Renault chassis, but they are. They're using that Czech 47mm anti-tank gun that the Panzerjäger 1 was using. So I mean, the Germans and you see a short-barreled Sturgeon, one of the photos. So once again, the Germans are really proving that they're a bit of a jumble sail army. You know, anything they've got knocking about, they will use.
So again, from last night, after our meal with a belly full of steak and wine, I managed to find a resource which located where that crossing took place.
Right.
And so we headed to those trees south of where they ended up being attacked by the Americans. Obviously, the Americans and the Allies are attacking them. They get an ever-decreasing perimeter around an area called Logtenbusch. And we went there to look at where those Jagdpanthers were attacking the road, and also attacking Royal Tank Regiment Shermans that are supporting the Americans. And what's really pleasing from that is that we actually found a very small memorial attached to a tree, which actually isn't in any of the books that I've seen anyway.
No, we were right off the beaten track. I mean, this was at a point where Nick was asking me if I was still happy to take the car down these unsurfaced country lanes. And it is when you go off-piste that you really find things that are of interest. What we were hoping to do, and the reason we were going down the lane, was to go through the woods, look for any gun positions which could still be found. Actually, what we found was some very nice, very posh houses that have been built there. So the woods were now all private property with, luxurious homes and acres of garden. But we weren't able to get in there. But we did find a memorial to NCO tank commander and 2 of his crew who were killed there. And we've actually been able to identify where their graves are in the Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery. So just a little interesting find that allows you to put modern topography and ground into context of the period. And that lane we were standing in, those trees may be a bit more mature, but it was still the same lane. I mean, that lane hadn't changed in the intervening 80 years. No,
absolutely right. And it's great when you come across a little find out there, because it reaffirms to you actually you're looking in the right place. You may be doing this after a few beers and trying to find the place to go, and you're reading the accounts, you're looking at the map, you're using a bit of nous, and you're saying, actually, this is where that must have happened.
Yeah.
Let's go there. You back your intuition, and that's so I feel really good about that.
Yeah, and it was a key point. It's a little bit of woodland, really, nothing there to mark it out as anything special. But this was the point where the Germans succeeded in cutting 30 Corps' route, a club route, for 2 whole days towards the end of the campaign. I mean, that has got to be a horrific setback when you know that you've got to get supplies through to those troops up ahead of you.
Yeah.
So,
and of course, not the first time they cut the route either, but certainly for one of the most significant periods of time.
Yeah,
so we've looked at that. We've been to Wesselwegel. We've had a look at a couple of the bridges there, and discussed some of the actions that went on there with US Airborne.
Yeah. Not a lot to see there though, because again it's
very modern.
So much built over. Looks a lovely town, a lovely place to live, but all those beautiful new houses are on top of the terrain where the fighting carried on. So we're pushing on now, we're pushing north, another 20 miles onto Grave. Spelt Grave if you're looking for it on a map.
Or Grave even, if you're looking for it on a map.
Yeah, and that should be interesting because not only is it a site of 1944 action, it's a site of 1940 action. So it'll be interesting to see that canal, and there's some Dutch bunkers there, which are going to be interesting for me to look at in particular. So onwards and continuing up the club route.
Club route as best we can.
Just to see how far we're going to get with the limited amount of time available.
Yep.
And tonight we dine in.
Tonight, Matthew, we dine in Nijmegen.
Nijmegen. So that should be good. Right, let's see where we go. Big milestone as we come up the ramp, we can see the imposing structure of Grave Bridge. Incredible. 9 spans we're about to go across. Okay. I'm slowing down to 26 miles an hour, top speed of a Sherman, and we're getting the amount of time it takes to go across.
I don't think the guy behind likes it too much.
No, the clunk of the sections. But this is an incredible bridge. You can see actually why troops moving across from one end to the other are actually going to be getting a lot of natural cover from
lots of
from the spans and the girders.
Yeah.
So interesting one.
It's right. A long bridge, and
here we go.
If it had been blown, what a
how the hell would you have got
that would
over
have been?
it? How the hell? Yeah.
Just coming off. Okay.
Coming off
Great.
now, you can see the church up ahead. Church steeple. Right,
and we're across
another bridge cross.
Another bridge.
Right, I'm at 26 miles an hour.
Yeah. So all those famous scenes of the Grenadier
8,000 cars behind me are backing up.
Well, they'll be backing up a lot faster if anybody blows this when we're halfway across.
Fortunately, it's a bit shorter than the bridge at Grave. That's all I can say. Actually, there's a great big lorry behind me. We will forget the 26 miles an hour thing. I'm moving a bit faster now. It's like that film where that lorry keeps chasing you.
Right, okay, we're across the Waal now then, so we're another river.
There are many rivers to cross. We're on the island, mate. We're on the island.
On the island now. It's just that one last bridge for us to cross.
But will it be a bridge TooFatLardies? Okay, well we've crossed the bridge at Nijmegen and had a look around the town there. Really impressive place. Unfortunately, with time being limited, we had an opportunity to have a look at some of the main points of fighting there with regards the German defences in what's actually a really surprisingly small city. Looking very much at the main defensive position on the roundabout in the city centre, and in the park there overlooking the bridge, where the US Airborne Forces and the British Guards had to fight their way right through and work together to get onto the bridge and then over the bridge as we have come. But now we've turned left and we've headed off to the west, because we've been looking for the point where the American Airborne Forces rode across the river and landed on the north bank of the river. So Nick, tell us what's happening here.
So we're standing here, we're across the other side of the Waal now. We've come across the massive Nijmegen Bridge, and we've swung left to have a look at where the American Airborne made their dramatic river crossing using small boats. And there's a lovely memorial here to the guys who sacrificed their lives as part of that crossing. And it's quite an evocative moment, really, to stand here and look at the new bridge, which now spans the river at this point, and to think that each night the way the bridge is lit up is done to commemorate the way that the guys crossed the bridge in 1944, which is a lovely gesture, I guess, by the Dutch people for what went on here. And it's it's quite a special place to stand, really.
Yeah, certainly really unusual to see a tribute delivered by synchronisation of street lamps, but great to see that the people of this area still remember the men who sacrificed their lives to liberate them. Very interesting standing here looking across the river. It makes you realise just how wide the river is. Rowing across that would not be a simple task. And behind us, to the north of the dike where we are standing, is of course the Hook of Holland fort, which was occupied at the time by German reservist troops aged between 15 and 60, according to the airborne soldiers who encountered them, having lost 50 or so men crossing the river. US accounts are fairly clear. They were not taking prisoners when they arrived here. So this is a really key point. And from here you can see how it would be possible for those troops to access the bridges, which is really the key to opening up this position and opening the route forward on to Arnhem, which is where we plan to go next as we take that short skip across the island, looking at a few points en route, but Arnhem's the next big junction for us. Well, here we go. This is what it's all been leading to. We're just about to cross the John Frost Bridge into Arnhem itself. Whilst I'm enjoying this moment, I'm also aware that I need to be in the right-hand lane very quickly when I get over the bridge. You
do, yeah, because we're going to need to swing round, and we want to come back round and park almost underneath the bridge. So just make it you're in that space. Mind your speed, though. Don't want to go too fast. We're not Grabner in his SS battalion.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Bring up the pier. We're on the. Great stuff. Good. So we're the Rhine.
The Rhine. Over the Rhine.
TooFatLardies are over the Rhine. Europe. Look out. So let's see what we can find up this side. So we're off to We're going to go right here.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Well, here we are, continuing with our tour, and on day 3 we're actually on the outskirts of Arnhem at the Wolfhazer Hotel.
We've done better than 30 Corps did. We made it across all those rivers, and we got across the Lower Rhine at Arnhem. So there you go, Horrocks.
I think you're talking Horrocks, mate, because I think the circumstances were a bit different. But, funnily enough, the one thing 30 Corps didn't have with them is a celebrity wargamer, whereas we do, as we've been joined today by Jasper of Caravanserai. Jasper, tell us all about the magazines that you publish.
Ganserite publishes WSS magazine, of course.
The famous WSS magazine.
Famous, I hope so.
Yeah.
As well as Ancient Warfare magazine,
Yeah.
Ancient History,
Yeah.
and Medieval Warfare magazine.
Right, brilliant. All of which are exciting reads. So,
Hope so.
here we are. Tell us about the building where we are today and what was happening here. What was its relevance to the battle for Arnhem?
Well, I'm pretty sure this is a new building, but in 1944, there was a Hotel Wolfheze in this spot.
Right.
And it was occupied by the troops of the 16th SS Training and Replacement Battalion under Captain Kraft, I think is
Sepp Kraft, yeah.
his name, and he was leading the efforts to block 1st Airborne Division trying to get to the road bridge, and they were pretty effective.
Yeah, because we're very, very close to the drop zones and landing zones here, aren't we?
Yeah,
we're
less
almost
than a mile
right
away.
in the heart of that,
Yeah.
aren't we? So the troops landing there and attempting to form up pretty much had an enemy on their doorstep from the very first moment. Although initially, Kraft had one company here.
Yeah, they only had a few troops here, but the Germans, the alert went out very, very early that something was up, and they responded with lightning speed. You can only express it that way. They were so fast, and they clearly had pre-set orders what to do if something happens. And that order was everybody collect on Arnhem, and in Arnhem there was somebody who just said, go west, find the enemy, where the shooting is, that's where you need to be.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And they effectively blocked 2 of the main routes into Arnhem that the British Paras are trying to take.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, as Meatloaf once said.
Exactly. Yeah, and as a result, only 2nd Battalion under John Frost gets to the bridge.
Yeah.
Later on, a 3rd company from 3 Para manages to crawl behind Kraft.
Yeah.
But the rest spend the night on the outskirts of Oosterbeek and try again the next day, by which time the Germans have installed a blocking line.
Yeah.
It's will prove to be
Too tough.
too tough. Yeah.
And effectively, that will end up becoming the eastern perimeter of the Oosterbeek pocket, won't it? Pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, what we're going to be doing is continuing our trip and having a look at really what happened on day one. Limited time as we're on our way to Crisis, and this was a somewhat unplanned tour. In fact, 2 days ago when we began it, we weren't sure if we were going to get here at all, or whether we'd be going to other places. But we, as we travelled up 30 Corps route, we just kept going. So we're going to go onwards. We're going to go down to Utrechtsweg next, I think, isn't it? And we're going to see the spot there where the commandant of Arnhem was killed by
3
Para, and have a look at that end of Kraft's blocking position, because we've been to the northern end along the railway embankment and seen where the Recce troops there were ambushed. And we're looking at that. Then we're going to be having a look at Spindler's blocking position further to the east, which was really the Kraft was buying time to allow that blocking position to really form up and harden on that line. And that's really going to be the story for today, and then having a look at the Hartenstein Museum to round it all off.
Yeah, very much looking forward to that. Looking forward to getting a bit of a closer look at some of the perimeter as well, if we can. Go down that way. Yeah. We're hoping that we can get to stay tonight at the hotel, which is on Lion Route, isn't it, on the way in?
Yeah.
So we should be able to see some of that before it gets dark.
A few more beers.
It would be rude not to.
It
surely.
would, wouldn't it? Yeah. Good. Okay. Right. Let's crack on. He had support from a heavy machine gun section from 2 Company and the battalion mortars, which you know are halfway down between the hotel and that junction. It said, we know from experience that the only way to draw the teeth of an airborne landing with an inferior force is to drive right into it.
Yeah.
From a tactical point of view, it would be wrong to play purely defensive role and let the enemy gather its forces unmolested. And that's what he did. There the machine gun section engaged gliders and soldiers who were landing with deadly accuracy. The section engaged the enemy for 20 minutes before withdrawing back to the Hotel Wolfhazer due to fear of encirclement. The section claims to have hit 4 gliders and wiping out the troops inside, causing great confusion among the enemy. We can take that with as many pinches of salt as you like. You're bound to say that, aren't you, really? I did. Okay, so here we are on the E31, heading away from Arnhem, having completed another morning of a busy morning. Actually, we started early, breakfast at 7 while it was still dark, and then out. We were at St Elizabeth's Hospital before 8 o'clock. We were seeing the house that Urquhart was hiding in. And then a bit of a walk into Arnhem, looking at some of the approach routes. Then out to the Easterbig perimeter. Been a busy morning, hasn't it?
Yeah,
and really a busy 3 days. Sorry to interrupt, Nick. You crack on, mate. You talk now.
Yeah. Do you want me to talk now?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll talk now. What do you want me to say?
Just talk about your reflections about the whole 3 unexpected days, because we really thought.
Well,
I know you were kind of optimistic about doing it, but
absolutely.
I, having not done any planning, we've certainly achieved far more than I ever thought we could, with some help, which we must mention.
Well, we need to acknowledge certainly the inputs of Jasper to help us around Wolfhazer yesterday.
A surprise celebrity arrival with Jasper coming to help us yesterday.
Yeah.
When we were looking at the landing grounds and the fighting around Wolfhazer, Setcraft and his blocking position there, and then Spindler's blocking position, which really, between those 2 guys, I mean, I know it's pretty unfashionable to say Kraft did a good job, because he was obviously a bit of a self-publicising individual, but really, when you look at it and you assess it, you have to say that he did a good job, Spindler did a good job of putting his blocking position in behind him, and also there were some questionable performances on the British side, really, weren't there?
That's the feeling I come away with after looking around Arnhem. Okay, we've just done 2 days of it, but we've done some fairly pivotal moments in terms of how that battle unfolded. Yeah. And one of the things that strikes me is, Urquhart disappearing, Lathbury leaving his brigade,
just how
decisions being made.
Just how important commanders not being where they should be and not doing the job they should be doing, but and buggering off and trying to manage parts of the battle that weren't their job to manage really came to the fore for me.
Yeah, Urquhart seems to be in the wrong place at every opportunity. He seems to be never in the right place to get things done. Now, I'm probably being unfair to him, and probably going to, upset a lot of people by saying that, because he has a good reputation as being the guy, who went into Arnhem with 10,000 and came out with 2. The sort of heroic last stand of the British paratroop division. But there's certainly something there about the way the commanders don't seem to be acting with the same alacrity or determination or initiative that the Germans are showing.
Very true. And what is interesting, it's almost a tale of 2 battles. The lack of initiative shown by some of the commanders who should be pushing their troops on to the bridge. The number of units that stand still for hours on end when there were opportunities on that first day to get through. The number of commanders who were in the wrong place. When you compare and contrast that with the speed with which the Germans reacted, and they had some pretty dodgy, scrappy units who were just being chucked in, but they were being led in there with some speed and some sense of purpose, whereas that does seem to be lacking. But once you then get to the point where the British are on the back foot in the Easterbig perimeter and around the bridge itself, well, they seem to be very much in their comfort zone. They're in the last ditch, and it is backs to the wall, and that heroic last stand, which isn't demanding that much initiative, is where that they are really fighting doggedly, and that's where the heroism comes through. So what we're not trying to do is denigrate the heroism of the troops who were fighting there in any way, shape or form. But it's just looking at the difference between the command styles of the British Army and the German Army, and also looking at the combat experience of the German Army and the British Army. The German Army has had experience of fighting in cities. The German Army puts the emphasis on Auftrags tactics, where you are saying to commanders, right, these are your orders, this is what you've got to do, but you're also putting it within a context of why they've got to do it. So if they need to change plans on the hoof, they are doing it because they're understanding the big picture. Jasper made a really important point yesterday when he was talking to us. He was saying, the Germans have got officers on their staff whose job it is to take those briefings and explain what's going on to the guys further down the chain, whereas the British are using dispatch riders. So when a company commander, a captain, receives orders from above and he says to the dispatch rider, well, what does this mean? The dispatch rider goes, I don't know, mate, I just brought the pouch to you with the messages in it. Whereas the German officer there who's delivering his orders is saying, this is the context, this is the situation in which your orders are couched. And also the emphasis in the German Army of saying, whenever you've got a decision to make, it is always better to do something than to do nothing. Yeah. And you get a number of critical points with the British where they are doing nothing rather than doing something.
And you get units operating next to each other that don't realise they're next to each other.
Yeah.
You have, instances whereas, for instance, 11 para are standing at the Hartenstein Hotel for 5 hours waiting to get orders as to where to go.
Where to go, yeah. And that's just remarkable. Yeah. That is just, that is not the way to get to the bridge at Arnhem. And if those guys had pushed on immediately, the number of men at the bridge would have been doubled.
Yeah.
And how different would that have been? I don't know. We really can't answer that, can we? But double the number of men in Frost's position around the bridge, well, surely that's got to be a larger perimeter. Yeah. Surely when you're in a city situation where you're giving ground not mile by mile but house by house, that's got to have changed the way things would have happened. So very, very interesting and very illuminating. And once again, we're finding that until you actually get your boots on the ground and examine that battle, you can't really understand that from a book or even from a map.
Yeah, I agree with that absolutely. And you look at that and you think, well, actually, Frost guys made the bridge, and thank God for the story that the British historians now put on that as part of the British culture of that heroic defence. But what if they'd stopped Frost as well? What if, because it could have been quite easy that Frost guys didn't make the bridge, and then the story would be totally different, because it would be a story of
not heroic failure, but epic failure.
Epic failure, absolutely. So thank God for the sake of our history that actually some guys did manage to get through to the bridge. Otherwise, it would have been very, very different. But great battlefield.
Frost was delayed at one point, wasn't he? Frost was delayed at one point by a pretty minor German position.
There's quite a lot of instances of fairly minor German positions bringing things to a halt.
That's right.
While guys, I guess, are trying to find their way around. We seem to have some music that's joining us. Can you hear that music, or is it just me?
I think it's
I've been contacted by...
What on earth is that?
I've been contacted by the angels. Great battlefield to walk around. Certainly Oosterbeek and the perimeter there, which lots of great sites to go to, lots of interesting aspects, and looking at fields of fire again and dispositions, and you realise the size of that perimeter, the ever-shrinking perimeter.
Yeah, it's a relatively small area they're in, but the perimeter is like a rabbit warren, isn't it? It's absolutely... the roads as they existed then, certainly towards the Rhine, and once you get south of Utrechtsweg, are very much loads of footpaths, loads of little roads where you've got, all those, it's effectively, what do you want to call it, a housing estate, but on a massive scale and on a rather posh scale. Very nice place to live, but lots of alleyways, lots of passageways, so defending it becomes difficult because an enemy who's well versed in infiltration tactics is going to be a hard one to fight. But also that does allow you to move troops from A to B without necessarily using the roads. So things like the German armour, which is pushing in those Stugs, there's opportunity to move round them with the Piats and take them out, and that happened a lot, didn't it? There were a lot of armoured vehicles.
There's a lot of armour taken out. Well, the anti-tank guns, claim a lot of them as well. The Germans are using a really interesting mix of armament around the perimeter. You've got everything ranging from King Tigers through Stugs, and then you've got Flampanzers, the old French Chars.
The Char B,
they're moving down and putting into action, and there's some really interesting little accounts of how they were taken out by various anti-tank guns around the perimeter.
Yeah.
So and I sense we're kind of waffling about Oosterbeek quite a bit. What are your reflections about the trip overall? We've done, we started off at Joe's Bridge. We came over we get to Valkenswaard. We came over Son Bridge, looked at 101 Airborne there, onto Nijmegen, onto the island, via Grave Bridge as well, of course.
Yeah.
We followed club route as best as we can.
Drill.
We got to Arnhem. We've done end-to-end the Market Garden campaign over the last 3.5 days. What are your reflections on it?
It's been fabulous. It's been hugely interesting. It's a shame that in some areas that there's so much stuff being tarmacked over and houses built, but to be honest with you, it's been a godsend in a way, because some parts of the campaign you simply can't really follow. So that has allowed us to focus on the bits that you can follow. And in a 3-day period, I think it's been very, very intense. I mean, we've really pushed ourselves, haven't we?
Yeah, more so than perhaps on any other previous trip.
Absolutely. And there's been a few photographs of pints of beer in Dutch pubs floating around.
That wasn't us.
It was us. But to be honest with you, we've all been so utterly shattered by the end of the day, because we've worn out a lot of shoe leather. We've walked a lot of miles. We've driven a lot of miles. By the end of the day, the consumption of alcohol has been pretty limited. It's been a case of snatching an evening meal, having a few pints and hitting the sack, and being up early the next morning ready to go out once more and continue it.
I'd say that by your standards they may have been minimal, but I think they're still sufficient enough to make you want to lie to your GP when he asks you how many units you've consumed in the last week.
Well, that's another story altogether. Feeling a bit jaded, feeling a bit exhausted. We're on our way to Antwerp now, and my plan when we get there is to go to bed for several hours before I do anything else.
But I would say you're right. I mean, I think I've taken some good things away from it in terms of how we may turn some of those actions into tabletop actions.
Great ideas.
So it's a really good idea to walk out. And perhaps we can touch on some of those maybe in a minute if you want to put the time into it, or at some other point in another podcast maybe. But there's lots of actions there we could look at. Left with the reflection of the performance of British Airborne that is perhaps slightly different to the view that I had before the trip, and how they got on at Oosterbeek and around the perimeter.
I would agree with that, and we all felt a degree of sadness, really, that potentially, a little bit of the shine was taken off the heroic story that we read when you look at how some of those decisions at the highest level about where to place themselves and what to do were undoubtedly odd.
But again,
the heroism of the men cannot be denied, and you can't take the edge off that.
Absolutely.
And the sheer bravery of those guys. But I started off believing that the Market Garden plan was one that was viable, which I believe is a slightly different position to the one you started off with. But I left it feeling that it could have still happened had there been more initiative on day one, on that first day, and I believe that there could have been more troops at the bridge, I don't believe they could have taken the south side of the bridge, but I believe that the bridgehead at the north end could have been larger and could have held out for longer, and that would have made, well, we just don't know what that would have resulted in.
Yeah, I think the tail wagged the dog. I think, the airborne planners had a big say in where the drop zones were. I think you have to question why it was that Browning took the whole core command structure in the first
with
lift.
him in the first lift.
And quite what that added is really quite questionable.
Yeah.
I think the plan is based on false assumptions about the quality of the defence and the state of the German military.
You look, for example, I'll give you an example. When you look at Setcraft's blocking position, many people will have heard about the reconnaissance jeeps going there and hitting the top end of Kraft's line. Well, we walked the whole front of Kraft's position. He had 2 companies. It's a colossal position. How on earth he could hold that with 2 companies before his the 3rd 9th company arrived. And the airborne jeeps hit the top end, which was held by a platoon of troops. And then it was just accepted that route in was blocked. It shouldn't have been. It was being held by a platoon of men. Yeah. They could have taken that on, but no, that's blocked. Let's try and find a different route. Which is when they hit Spindler.
Yeah, and also which is one of the ways that Kriegspiel actually helps us as a gaming platform to think about how those decisions are made. So these guys have gone off here. They've made a contact. They've engaged the enemy there, and some guys a quarter of a mile up on another path have hit the enemy, and they'll action there, and you're kind of thinking in your mind's head as a commander, is there a line between those 2 points? Have I now hit the German main line, or what do I need to do to understand if this is the main, what's going on here? Yeah. And it's very messy, and of course looking at it from however many years we are after the event, we're getting it wrong. We're not truly understanding the situation as they saw it. What's great about going there on the ground, of course, is that you can be on the spot where that attack happened, and you can understand the heroism and the bravery of the guys involved who were taking that fight to the enemy in the way that they did.
Yeah.
But the way the overall battle hangs together just becomes very cloudy and difficult to understand. But really, I think it's that actually the German soldier put up a good fight at Arnhem.
Oh, without doubt. And his commanders reacted in the way they should have done, really quickly, very professionally, threw themselves into the teeth of the attack, and did everything they could to destroy the cohesion of the landings. And maybe, to be fair to the British, that's why their senior commanders were running here, there and everywhere, because they could see their plans unravelling.
Yeah. I just think there's too many, from a risk management perspective, there's too many single points of failure. You could say that, if you don't take a risk, then you don't get the rewards. But actually, I think the risks on the Market Garden route, look at Sonn Bridge, look at Nijmegen Bridge, look at Grave Bridge. If Grave Bridge is blown, it's such a long bridge, if that is blown, you're not going to go anywhere. You can't you can't put a Bailey Bridge across the Grave Bridge. Okay, at Sonn you can, because it's only a 20-yard bit of canal. But if the Grave Bridge was blown, nobody's going anywhere. Nijmegen, nobody's going anywhere. No. I think it was actually fortunate for them, or maybe tantalisingly unfortunate, that they managed to get as far as they did. And of course, the other thing we've not been able to look at, and this would be really interesting, well, is some of the actions that take place after the collapse of the pocket, after the withdrawal of the airport, which we haven't been able to do. So that's a little bit frustrating. It's interesting, isn't it, to think about some of these actions, about how we rate those troops when we actually play them in chain of command, because you've got situations on the ground here where we've got elite troops, as we would define them, as British paratroopers. I'm not getting that in my reading about this action.
No, I quite agree. I mean, you've got to take the evidence, and you've got to look at the way the people fought, and think about ways that we can use the rating system in chain of command to differentiate between units. Now, let's talk within the context of the 1940 handbook and some of the changes that we've introduced there. Things like the red dice. Some forces have an option of taking a red dice. Interestingly, in 1940, we are not talking about elite forces, because nobody's got the experience. Nobody's had that fighting experience that really makes them elite. So the red dice option in the 1940 handbook, allowing one additional different coloured dice in the command dice roll, really is there to reflect a command initiative, much more, alacrity, much more initiative. Initiative's probably the word.
Yeah.
Which is not something you could really give to the paras, to the British paras, or in many cases, the American paras. Whereas certainly the people who are acting and responding very, very rapidly and making not only decisions but the right decisions are the Germans. Even those with relatively, inexperienced troops under their command are units that are being led by experienced NCOs and officers who, even if they haven't got the particular experience, have certainly got that doctrine of do something rather than do nothing. So in terms of the British paras, you wouldn't give them that dice. You wouldn't give them elite status, because really they haven't. They're not really showing fantastic fieldcraft, are they? When you read about some of the attacks where they're simply attempting to batter their way in, you're getting the feeling that this is a blunt implement, and they're bashing themselves to death against German defences. So 5 dice, but where they do come into their own is going to be how long they retain their fighting spirit for. So at what point do they lose their 5th dice? Well, probably when their force morales drop to 3. And maybe when their force morales drop to 2, they go down to 4 dice. And when their force morales drop down to 1, they go to 3 dice. But they're still fighting, and they're still a relatively coherent force right to the very end.
And the other thing with them is their mix of arms as well. So they don't get that elite status in their with their dice, but of course they've got a fairly high proportion of submachine guns.
They've got a lot of firepower.
And the American powers especially have that too.
Yeah.
So they have. It's not to say that they're actually the same as a regular battalion. They've still got that additional close quarters punch that you'd expect to see with airborne.
Yeah.
But without them having necessarily the initiative, always that they might expect that you would give to elite troops.
Yeah. I think that's right. Whereas if you look at, let's take Kraft Camp Group, let's take the SSNCO school at Arnhem, who were forming the real nucleus of von Tettau's force, attacking from the west against the Easterbeek perimeter. If you're talking about the Camp Group Spindler, and those other forces from Hohenstaufen, well, you would give them the red dice because they are displaying that tactical initiative. Would you call them elite? Well, there is an argument for maybe calling some of the veterans of Hohenstaufen elite, but you certainly couldn't give that to people like Sepp Kraft's forces, because they're an ersatz battalion, they're a replacement battalion. They don't have the combat experience, so you'd have to rate them as potentially regular troops rather than green because of the way they performed, and their force morale is probably going to be quite vanilla. So the standard force morale from the main rule books, but the difference is they've got that red dice, which is reflecting their leaders having that bit more urgency about what they're trying to do. But you can use different parts of the rules to tailor-make forces for your chain of command games. And really, it's not just the weapons they've got, although that does play a part. I mean, for example, elements of Möller's camp group, which is holding the ground down near the Rhine, they apparently had a lot of MG42s, which, having been retreating through Holland, pursued by the Allies, certainly the Allies after the retreat from Normandy, they apparently have been picking up a lot of MG42s. So not a lot of men, but firepower strong. Yeah,
they retain that, don't they? I mean, of course, not all of the men there are guys from the west that have been pushed back through Normandy. I'm just reading in one of the books around pioneers being flown in from Poland, assault pioneers being flown in from Poland.
Oh, those
to
are the
assist
guys
with
who are going into the Oosterbeek perimeter, weren't
Yeah,
they?
so they're not defeated army of the West. These are guys who are flown in.
Right.
24 hours later, they're on the streets in Arnhem with their flamethrowers and other nasty stuff, and they're taking the battle to a different enemy.
Yeah, but look at Spindler. Interestingly, Spindler's camp group on day one is not made up of infantrymen. Spindler's the artillery commander.
Yeah.
His men are the gunners who haven't got their guns, and yet they're fighting as infantry and doing that job. So you can't call them elite infantry, but maybe some of the other guys coming in, you can. It's a case of taking each individual unit, isn't it? And looking at the Kriegsmarine guys. I mean, there is even a case of some Dutch Boy Scouts, we'll call them Boy Scouts, their equivalent of the Hitler Youth, who had been visiting one of the Dutch SS units, had gone to a presentation to be given this nice book, reminding them of their camp. And all of a sudden they say, right, here's your pressed into uniform and we're going to give you some guns. I mean, how do you rate these troops?
Well, on the west side of the perimeter, you've got all kinds, as you say. You've got exactly that mix, haven't you? And you've got units like that trying to coordinate together. And all the texts from the German side say how difficult that is, actually. To if you've got Dutch Boy Scouts, you've got Luftwaffe guys, you've got Kriegsmarine, you've got whatever else is in there in that mix. So is it a case of saying, well, actually maybe there's a little bit of unreliable allies going on here? Can you always rely on the person to your left and right?
That's true. I mean, certainly if you look at the performance of the Wacht Battalion, the Jagd Company of the Wacht Battalion, they were called a hunting company because their job was to hunt down escaped prisoners from prison camps. But they were pushed into the line up on the heath and told to shoot the British paras. Certainly the British reports there suggest that those Dutch SS guys were pretty happy to surrender fairly rapidly, and the Dutch SS members' accounts, where they were interviewed by the Dutch police after the war, does confirm that the paras were not shy about going in and mixing it literally hand to hand, and that was not something that troops who were concentration camp guards were used to. So I mean, their force morale might start off at normal, but that's going to come tumbling down instantly, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's also in the Germans, it's their ability to subordinate these units and to get them to operate with it under each other, under a different command structure, under a changing command structure that's emerging as the battle develops, and they're able to do that with an alacrity that the British don't have. We said before about this idea that actually I think is it Brigadier Hicks, he moves the 11th Parachute Regiment out from Hackett's brigade before Hackett arrives and attaches them to one of the other brigades going into Arnhem. But they wait 5 hours before they actually move and do anything. The Germans don't show that delay. That 5-hour delay wouldn't be there.
No.
So it's the idea of elite is an interesting one for discussion.
It is, and it's a difficult one, isn't it? And the more I think about it, and the way I've looked at the 1940 handbook, it's a case of, well, nobody's elite because nobody's got the experience. But when you actually look at troops in 1944, are the elite troops performing in that sort of stereotypical "I'm much better than you are" manner? There are an awful lot of troops who fought their way right the way through the war who are heartily fed up of being thrown into the front line and are not throwing their lives away. We hear of sticky, that term sticky being used for troops who fought their way through North Africa, and Monty perceives as being elite troops that he wants with him in Normandy, and they are fed up with it. And they're not reacting in that way. So maybe that classic wargamer term, green regular elite, is not really what we should be looking at anymore. Maybe that's too much of a cliche. I mean, certainly I find that with sharp practice, for example, when we look at what making troops elite, making troops green, does it really matter? In fact, what should matter is, whether the way they can fight. And we should be reflecting the abilities of those troops rather than using rather rather cover-all terms like green, regular and elite.
Well, it's a definition of quality, isn't it? And of course, quality is being fit for purpose for what you need it for. What's higher quality, a carrier bag or a leather satchel? Well, it kind of depends what you're going to put in it.
Yeah. If you're buying a pound of carrots, you want a plastic bag.
Absolutely. So elite is a kind of conditional statement, perhaps, about where these guys are at and what they're attempting to do and what tools they've got to do.
Yeah, very true. And again, coming back to what I said earlier, if you look at the British paras, you cannot give them a red dice for command initiatives. But my God, do they know how to fight and die in a ditch? So and probably do that better than, with backs to the wall, do that better than any other soldiers you could really think of. So you have to give them. You have to reflect that. You have to give them that ability to fight on to the very bitter end.
And that's a combination of national characteristic resilience and also esprit de corps.
And the full esprit de corps, but you represent that not with more command dice, but with a different force morale structure, and the fact that doesn't fall off in the way that other troops do.
They're not beaten until they're beaten.
True enough.
Another observation, if I can, as well, before we sort of move on, is the overwhelming friendliness and good spirit of the Dutch people.
Oh,
not only we have Jasper come out to us yesterday, but so two other stories that just reinforce this. Yesterday morning, when we crossed over Nijmegen Bridge and turned left, and we looked at the spot where the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment came across the Vaal in small boats.
Yep.
And there's a little monument there just near where the new bridge has been built. And we were standing there looking at the monument, and a lady rode past on her bicycle.
On her way to work, probably at that time.
Yeah, that's right. And then she goes past us about 15, 20 yards, and then she turns round and comes back and says to us, excuse me, gentlemen, I hope you don't mind me disturbing you, but would you like to know anything about the memorial that goes on every night at the bridge? And she was telling us about what happens there every night, where they have a string of lights that runs across the bridge from south to north, representing the journey of the paratroopers across the bridge, and just took time out of her day to stop and talk to these four fat blokes. I'm sure they see lots of tourists doing exactly the same thing.
Three fat blokes.
Yeah. And she had the time and the generosity and the kindness to come and give us that piece of information. Yeah. And then the other one happened to us this morning when we were in Oosterbeek, and we're looking at Jack Baskyfield's tree. So Lance Sergeant Jack Baskyfield wins the Victoria Cross for his handling of anti-tank guns on the edge of the Oosterbeek perimeter. As the British are collapsing back into the perimeter, he's manning anti-tank guns to hold off German Stugs. So there we were, corner of the road, with our guidebook out, talking about what went on there, and all of a sudden, as if by magic, a little man appears, and he says to us, "Is there anything I'd like, anything you don't understand or you'd like to know about this encounter?" So obviously he'd grown up with people standing on the corner of his road looking gormless, and we fitted that bill perfectly. But he then proceeded, he was obviously a local historian of some kind. He then proceeded to give us excellent, really good local information
about how the layout of the road had changed, and how that affected where people think the gun was and where the guns actually were. And he'd actually been and dug up some shell cases from another position just up the road, where a third gun was in that position. Very, very interesting. But the guy just came and volunteered the information, spent 20 minutes explaining to us how everything hung together at that point. And
we haven't had that in any other battlefield I've visited.
No, but equally,
and I've visited lots.
Equally in the pubs, in the restaurants, in the bars, we've been made fantastically welcome. It's been a wonderful experience, really, and the people of Arnhem and the whole of Holland, where we've been through, were clearly very pleased to see that we were there to commemorate events which led to their liberation nearly 75 years ago. Okay,
so starting to close off now. What is your top moment?
My top moment will be getting into bed when I get home and not having a drink.
Come on, that doesn't count. What's your favourite moment, mate, from all those battlefields that you've walked in the last 3 days?
I really enjoyed Sonbridge. For me, Sonbridge was brilliant because we stood there and we worked out a scenario for chain of command. But I also liked on the Oosterbeek perimeter where we worked out a multi-table approach to running the defence of the Oosterbeek perimeter.
So how would that work roughly?
You'd have multiple tables.
So a table with the northwest, a table.
Well, I've not really done the detail yet, but different tables representing different points along the perimeter, with the Germans having a pool of resources with which to attack, and the British having a pool of resources with which to defend. And how they were deployed from table to table would depend on, what the command decisions made at the top level. In a way, it kind of combined Kriegspiel with chain of command, because once again, the feel you get is that every battle is actually numerous, hundreds of little battles on a street corner there, or road junction somewhere else, and piecing those things together into one much bigger games day could be a fantastic gaming experience.
And I think, I agree with you. You could do that from the perspective of the perimeter and the holding and the defence of the perimeter.
Yeah.
Or you could do it from the perspective of the 3 routes into Arnhem. And have those, which see what happens there.
Yeah. There's so many different options. I mean, you could get 200 scenarios out of.
Well, and more, because we know. As always, what we do in these events is we spend a few days at a battlefield, and while you're there, you're also reading more and more about the action all the time, and you're realising there's so much more to this that we need to look at. Getting some more books. Got a couple of books at the museum yesterday. I know you did as well. So there's more reading there. And I think for me, that time we spent driving around those lanes around Howes Highway, just west of Vagel, where we were looking at. Where the Germans cut the line for 2 days. Finding that little memorial was brilliant, and that was a fantastic.
That was great.
I think also, I think actually there's something about Nijmegen that I really found valuable. It's a very, very messy battle in the town at Nijmegen. Really difficult to understand. Of course, a lot of the roads have changed. But just the whole geography of how that place hangs together. Standing on the Valkhof there, looking across towards the bridge, you just get a feeling that you're somewhere special, and that's what battlefield tours should be all about as well. They should give you that feeling in your, inside that actually you're doing something meaningful. Even if just for a couple of days.
I certainly agree with you. It's, once again, a really, really worthwhile experience, and one from which I personally have learned so much. It puts the whole operation. It's effectively you read the books and you think you know what's gone on, and then doing the battlefield is effectively like adjusting the dial on a pair of binoculars, and suddenly everything comes into focus and becomes very, very clear, and stuff that you couldn't understand becomes understandable. And without having stood in those places and seen those battlefields, you're seeing the picture, but you're seeing it in a fuzzy or murky manner, and this really then just brings it into sharp focus. Metaphorically and literally, mate.
Metaphorically. So we are approximately 62 miles from Antwerp. So at that point, I think it's probably worth us signing off from this piece at least. Who knows what gems will come up with over the next 48 hours, but we've got Crisis Weekend. Going to be hopefully.
Is that tomorrow?
That's tomorrow.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Well,
are you going to make it?
Well, it's going to be tough. Another night on the beer, the 4th night on the beer in a row is going to be a challenge, but I'm sure it's one that I will rise to,
and hopefully we'll
live.
I was going to say, hopefully we'll meet up with Sidney. Having been let loose on our own for the last 3 days. He'll be keen to keep us on a tight leash. This weekend. Okay, right. So let's do that.
here we are, sat at Calais on our way home, waiting to board the train that will take us under the channel. And whilst we can't do our usual spot in the library, we have kind of brought with us our own little library, haven't we?
We've got a portable library, yeah.
Yeah, because as we were planning this on the hoof, which is something I always say never do, always plan in advance, we were obliged to bring along a big pile of books and work from them. So, Nick, tell me about the books that you have found invaluable for looking at 30 Cours Route and Market Garden.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'm also trying to eat a Terry's chocolate orange at the moment.
We were going to use that, weren't we, for something?
We were. Luckily, we just found it in the bag, so it's going to give us a vital bit of sustenance as we wait for the ferry or for the train even.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Market Garden, massive campaign, loads and loads of books on it.
Yeah.
I think the first one I read was Cornelius Rhine's A Bridge Too Far when I was about 10, something like that probably. But of course, when you're going touring, you want to be able to find sites, have decent access to maps, know what happened where, and also know how to find it now, as opposed to, finding it 70 years ago might be in one way, but these days you've got to take modern roads to get to the location. So books that offer a then and a now perspective are really quite important in that.
Yeah.
So I know we're going to talk about the pen and sword range of books because they're crucial for battlefield tourists, and we've spoken about those before.
Yeah.
And that range has been really, really helpful for this.
Yeah.
But I'm going to talk about a series of books called After the Battle, which is presented and edited by Carol Magri, which is a 2-volume set of hardback books. Very impractical, actually, for the battlefield tourist.
Yeah.
But actually excellent books when it comes to looking at the Operation Market Garden then and Operation Market Garden now. And funny enough, those volumes of books are called Operation Market Garden then and now. Each book, well, I think in total over the 2 books, there's something like 720 pages describing the Operation Market Garden in detail, from the planning right the way through to the creation of the first Allied army, through to the first drops, through to the link-up, through to attacks on Howes Highway, Polish parachutists landing at Drill, etc., the collapse of the perimeter, and the aftermath. And it is absolutely riddled with photographs taken then and now. So very useful for you to use this to locate where you want to head to, what you're going to see when you get there, and to help you piece that together in a way that enables you to tell the story of the action from start to finish. So we've really looked at these as we've gone. I mean, I did a fair bit of planning for this, because I was confident that we were going to be, that I was certainly going to be doing this, and I needed to make sure that we had the skeleton of something that we could unfold if we needed to. And I've used this book very much for that. And we used it also when we were out on our feet walking around. There's nothing quite like walking down a road and identifying a house as being the same house that was in the 1944 photograph, and realise that you're standing where there was an engagement or a tank was knocked out or that kind of thing, just to help you get a bit of the atmosphere about what went on there. So these are 2 really, really good books, 720 pages. Couldn't recommend them highly enough if you're going to do the Operation Market Garden route. Who are they published by? After the Battle, they're published by, I think, is certainly the range of books, and the publisher is who? I'm trying to find out now. Publishers by Battle of Britain International Limited, and I know they're available on Amazon because that's where I got this one from.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I've got my own set. I think I should point out that these books came about because there used to be a series of books published called After the Battle, a series of magazines, After the Battle magazine. And to give you an indication of when Nick says these are pictures of the battlefield now, many of the pictures of the battlefield were actually taken when I was at school in the 1970s, and then they updated them in the 80s. So they you will find that some of those buildings are not there. However, you will also find that an awful lot of them are still there now, and it's a lot easier to find from looking at the 1980 odd version rather than looking at the 1940 odd version. And they are very, very comprehensive, and they do give an excellent overview of the battles. They use a lot of photographs from propaganda company photographers on the German side, and also, British and American embedded photographers, and use those to make comparison shots, which are really helpful, as Nick said.
And they allow you to go deeper than the pen and sword books. The pen and sword book will, just because of the size of the publication, pen and sword book will talk about an action. It might have one photo that supports that. But in a book like this, you've got possibly a more detailed description of the action, and almost definitely more photographs. The cost of that, however, is a massive increase in weight, and the size of the volumes are. These are large.
It is effectively like carrying around a couple of house bricks with you, which
like
isn't always
a couple
ideal.
Of encyclopedias, indeed.
Yeah. So if you're on your feet trudging, a mile across a field to get a certain viewpoint, it is not ideal. However, these days, it's quite possible to take a photograph of any of the pages you think are going to be relevant, and then just take your mobile phone with you.
Well, that is exactly what I did. In fact, for the early part of the tour, where I was able to have the time to do that, was I took some photos of the photos in these books.
Yeah.
And used those in a presentation folder, which is obviously a lot lighter to carry around.
Yeah.
Just so you can say, okay, this is where we are, and this is a photo from that. But having the books, it's invaluable, because you always want access to the photo that you didn't copy, or to the one part of it that actually becomes very relevant when you're there, that you didn't realise would be so relevant when you were planning in advance. So, recommend those books. Certainly for Market Garden, if you're going to do it, get those books.
Okay, really good. Certainly books that I would heartily recommend as well. My choice is slightly different. You read an awful lot of books about Arnhem, and especially things like the pen and sword books, which are really, really very focused on the exploits of battlefield visitors, battlefield tourists. I have to say, it does seem to me that battlefield tourists are often looking for something quite different to wargamers, in as much as they may well be looking to find where Uncle Johnny got wounded, or Uncle Fred won his military medal, and consequently they do tend to be a bit Anglo-centric, or even US-centric, if we're talking about things like the US drop zones. I wanted to take a look from the other side of the fence, and I picked up and brought with me a couple of books that I thought were important. One of which is In the Firestorm of the Last Years of the War, which is possibly the least snappy title that anyone has ever come up with, by William Tyker. It's the 2nd SS Panzer Corps history, the 9th and 10th Divisions, Hohenstaufen and Frundsberg, both of which were operating in the Arnhem area. And I thought it interesting to get the view from those divisions. SS histories are always a bit dodgy, in as much as you can look at something like the history of 12 SS done by Hubert Mayer, and what you've effectively got there is pretty much the official history, which is on par with any Allied official history. You look at some other units, and it can well be written by somebody who has an interest in that unit which is less than savoury. The gentleman who wrote this book did actually serve with one of these divisions, and to be fair, I think it's a pretty fair commentary on what happened, and that's the type of information that is often overlooked, and some of the preconceived ideas you have about who was doing what can often be blown out of the water when you discover that these things were not accidental, they were planned, or they were not planned, they were accidental. So going to look at the other side of the fence is important. So I bought that book. I also bought It Never Snows in September, which is subtitled The German View of Market Garden at the Battle of Arnhem by Robert J. Kershaw. Robert Kershaw has produced a book that actually is pretty much standard work for anybody who's a serious student of the battle for Arnhem. It does have...
Bless you.
Thank you.
Got a tickly nose.
Hold on. It's alright, I'll just keep going, I'll cut it out. It does have the downside that it tends to focus more on Arnhem than the other parts of Market Garden and the drive north, but it quite adequately covers both, really. So that presents a good book. There are other books that I've been to, lots of individual histories which I looked at, and indeed I picked another book up while I was there, which was a small book written originally in Dutch and translated into English on the battle for Ginkle Heath, which is interesting because it focuses on a very small part of the action. As I think we've said already in this Oddcast, one of the things that really comes through loud and clear is how the fact that any big battle like this is actually a series of smaller engagements, and the battle for Ginkle Heath is an interesting one. So it's important to, rather than take any one book and think you've got the whole picture, it is important to have a look at smaller books which focus on smaller actions, and read through them, because they're potentially going to give you a lot more detail on a very specific area of the action, and often being able to find that degree of detail and then going to visit the spot is a lot more interesting, because it becomes a lot more personal. You're hearing about what somebody's done in one particular foxhole and what somebody's doing in the next foxhole, and you can just really often appreciate a lot more about how a battle was fought than just by looking at a single volume large scale history. So I guess the answer for me is it's tactical snippeting, really. You've got to go to any number of sources, compare notes, and then draw your own conclusions about what was happening. And don't forget, there are two sides to every story, which is why I've tended to look here at books from the German side.
Good, and worth mentioning the pen and sword books in general again, because the Battleground series, is essential and is portable and can be taken with you.
It is essential. I can't overstress that word. Actually, they are not everything. They are. You'd be making the mistake of taking a single volume if you just took them. However, it is absolutely the single volume that should provide the foundation for any tour, and you can then use that to build upon and add more information on.
And in Market Garden there are 5 books. I think
five books, yeah.
Cover the entire campaign, and we've
from the top end you've got Oosterbeek and the landing grounds, you've got Arnhem the bridge, you've got the island, you've got Nijmegen, and you've got
Hell's Highway, which also covers the advance of 30 Corps from the jump off as well.
Or is it Eindhoven? You got Eindhoven or Nijmegen? It's Eindhoven, isn't it? Not Nijmegen. Hell's Highway covers Nijmegen.
Hell's Highway covers Eindhoven.
Right, I've got them the wrong way round again.
Nijmegen is covered by the book of the same name.
Right, okay. That always helps.
In the title.
That always helps. I'm not looking at them at the moment.
Yeah. And they're all really good. But actually, what I found really helpful this time as well was before we came across, I didn't realise this, but the guys offered DVDs.
Right.
The same team that wrote the books have done a series of DVDs where actually they're filmed on the spot and they will tell you the story. So you can watch a DVD on, I think the DVDs more or less match the book titles.
Yeah.
So you can watch the DVD. Each DVD is about 80 minutes long.
Yeah.
And it is the guys going around telling you what happened here. They're bringing a few interviews of individuals. For instance, there's an interview with Lord Carrington about his experience crossing Nijmegen Bridge, etc., which is lovely to see. And they just give a really nice way of capturing the flavour of it before you go. And I found it. I did put some time into watching those before I came away, and I'll probably never watch them again. But they are fantastic for that. Really, really helpful for that purpose.
Good primer.
And affordable as well. You're getting a set of DVD. I don't know what I paid for them, but they were not inexpensive and certainly worthwhile if you're going to invest the time and energy in a trip of that kind. So DVDs and books can be equally useful. Good. Okay, we don't know what Sidney's book choice would have been, of course, because he's not with us any longer, having left him in Antwerp to do the continental thing, whatever it is he's going to do. So we'll have to find out what his book choices were at another time.
Yeah, I think that's probably quite fortunate.
Yeah.
In this instance. Yeah, good. Well, there we go. It's been an unusual Oddcast, this, in as much as it's pretty much all been recorded sitting in a car going from place to place. But hopefully it's been of mild interest, and as a result, I'm sure we're going to be producing some scenarios for the TooFatLardies
No question.
annual album. Annual that's coming up. We've got a few ideas there, so hopefully we'll be able to provide you with some good scenarios from 1944 for both British and American, and obviously the Germans.
Yeah, and I'm still keen to do some more of those online games that we spoke about on the way out. So using the Discord chat channel. So we're going to do a bit more of that, and maybe share our experiences a little bit as that goes on as well.
Onwards and upwards.
Onwards and upwards. So it's good night from me.
And good night from me, eating a chocolate orange.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to do
Podcast like no other.
So here we are. We're sitting in the bar of the Pink Flamingo.
Crying in the Rhine.
It's a post-crisis committee meeting.
Yeah.
Rich, how was your day?
It was a kind of so-so day, and I'm going to make sure it never happens again. I don't think we can use this.